Good morning, everyone. It still is morning here, and I'd like to welcome you all to another broadcast and podcast of Lighting the Candle, A World That Works. This is where a panel of us get together on a weekly basis and sometimes more often. And we're having conversation and dialogue for the purpose of creating an empowerment zone. So when you're listening to us, we're asking you to, for a moment, pretend like all the things that are going on in your life that are going really well and all the things in your life that are not going so well. For a moment, you can let all of that kind of sit down at the side and just enjoy the conversation and participate from wherever you are. What you're hearing from us is going to resonate at different times, and it's going to resonate with different people at different times. And we're really committed to having an authentic dialogue. For instance, nobody knows what we're going to talk about today, and I'm going to make it up on the spot. And my two really great friends, Ken and Melissa, are going to go right along with me, and we're going to have a great conversation. So all of that said, let's just dive in. Let's go for 100% empowerment today and a world that is absolutely lit on fire and works, okay? So I'm thinking today, let's go back and let's talk about some community possibilities. So for instance, what's coming to mind for me right now is the whole idea of cooperation, possibly collaboration, compromise, and then what about synchronicity? So any of those four or all of those four that seem to speak to you, if you have something to say. And Ken, if you want to give us just a little bit of a background, Melissa, also you, when we get to you, let people know who you are and what we're up to. So Ken, would you like to go first?
Oh, sure. So yeah, I'm Ken, and I'm the founder of Quester's Way, and just I never really know how much to say when we talk about ourselves. You know, it's really just a lifelong entrepreneur who's just everything that we've done has been about creating, like you're talking about, community mainly through businesses that help people experience meaningful human connection. And what it's really been about is helping people learn, become lifelong learners, and doing that through a whole bunch of, empowered learning skill sets and environments, whether it was martial arts or Quester's Way or some of the other projects we're working on. So yeah, that's what it's always been about for us.
Any thoughts on those four words, or how they mean, or what they stand for in a community setting?
Yeah, it's funny because I'm listening to a book right now by John Maxwell, his latest book, and it's about basically making a difference in the world, being the change in the world. And he actually mentions two of those words, collaboration and cooperation, and he differentiates. And it was just really interesting. He's talking about cooperation as being something that's not necessarily going to lead to a 1 + 1 = 3 type of environment. Like, you cooperate with people, but there's not the same level of intention and investment. And he said what we need more of is collaboration, more of an active state of, really sharing and giving and being generous and seeing what comes out on the other side of it. So those are the two words that, struck me as just interesting, because I'm literally just listening to a book right now and he was talking about that. So
who knows where I get this stuff from? I'm a pretty good listener, So Melissa?
I think that's perfect. I love the how you explain the difference between the two of them, because I think that's I think that you're more vested into it when you're doing collaborations. So I run the Breakfast Club networking groups. So there's several groups throughout the state of Connecticut, a couple in Mass, and so each group is there to help each other, pass leads and referrals. But in essence, what I'm doing is I connect people, right? I provide a venue for people to connect with one another, because everything kind of starts there, right? And then, what they do with those connections, hopefully they're doing things like, collaborations that they can do together to help each other. And I think that happens a lot. But it all starts with the connections and allowing people to have a venue where they they can continue those connections, because sometimes we meet people, but then we never really talk to them again. So this is just a way that people can stay connected with each other. So I think that's a very important piece. And, we were talking about earlier, before you started recording, Bill, about the importance of, being healthy, like what you do, and how it's important to have a good night's sleep, eat well, and to, exercise, right? All of that is important. But as you mentioned, I think you were mentioning your top 5 that you would always go with. Another one really is about connections, because that helps us to be healthier. Just even those social interactions, and having friends and having people that you can work, reach out to, I think is also a key piece in staying healthy, as well. So that's all I got.
Totally agree. And then again, coming back from the community standpoint, Melissa, we're talking about a cooperation, collaboration, a couple other things, and synchronicity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the compromise one. I'm really looking forward to that conversation. Yes.
Okay.
Well, you know what the definition of compromise is, right?
Go ahead. Let's hear your definition.
It's an agreement where all parties are equally unhappy with the outcome. So this whole idea and the whole conversation of, it's a net zero sum game. The pie is only so big, and if somebody gets more of the pie, somebody has to get less. Well, unfortunately, the work that we did in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s has long been forgotten. It's not in the culture at this point anymore. I just keep hearing that all the time, that, we have to, they're going to get some of what they want. We're going to get some of what we want, but nobody's going to get everything and nobody's going to be happy. That is such old thinking. That has absolutely nothing to do with creating a better world. The whole idea of setting aside a compromise in favor of something that works fabulously for everybody involved takes more work, it takes more ingenuity, and it takes a real commitment, to lay down whatever positionality that you had at the beginning of the conversation in favor of something that is above and beyond that. So yes, you can always come back to where you disagree, but how about you stand on top of the shoulders of each one of the things that you do agree to and create something that's better than anybody could have done on their own.
Mm-hmm.
Bill, you're triggering another book. Look at so the title, for all of our lovely listeners, the title of the John Maxwell one is Change Your World, which is new. But what you just made me think of is Chris Voss wrote a book called Never Split the Difference. And it is exactly what you're talking about. And he's about, do not compromise, do the work necessary to get to the better solution, to get to the better outcome. And it's very, very interesting, because it's such a different perspective to adopt at the beginning. And his whole approach is not about, that zero sum kind of scarcity mindset that you're talking about. It's a place of, abundance and best outcomes. Of course, there's discomfort and disagreement at various times, but that's just creation energy in my world. So he's got a great, he's that ex-FBI guy who, that's what he was. He was an FBI negotiator. So he has some very real world experience in how that looks, and came up with this whole process for it. So really cool. Good resource.
The interesting part of that, Ken, is that everybody acts like the world is a certain way and that's how it is. It's freaking nonsense, okay? That's an agreement that you say something, I say something, and we say, yeah, it's not working, and that's just how it is. That's one perspective. We've had this conversation so many times that there are infinite possibilities in terms of what a moment can be and how that moment can be experienced, by whom, when, all those sorts of, it's an infinite number of possibilities in any particular moment. And when people agree that it doesn't work and that's as good as it gets for right now, so you take a little bit, I'll take a little bit, and we're done, no change and no difference gets made in the world. And that's the important part. If we have our world leaders sitting down and agreeing that the status quo must be held in place at all costs with whatever outcome that we agree to afterwards, they shouldn't have sat down in the first place, in my opinion.
So Bill, this is interesting because as I'm thinking about this, there are people out there, much like yourself, and probably Ken, even though I don't know you as well. It's that are open-minded enough to kind of check their emotions at the door and say, hey, let's just try to create something that's better, and not holding on to that ego of being right. But let's face it, a lot of people have a difficult time doing that. I know, like, for me, like, I try not to be so, I guess, not to so married to different ideas, so to speak. It's like, what, this is always movable and changeable. And I've always been kind of open-minded and not angry that people have disagreed with me, but we all come from our own experiences, and emotions definitely play a role for people. And it's really the only way and maybe you guys have other ideas, that I've gotten people to kind of open up their minds a little bit, is just to make them feel safe, like letting them share with me without judging them, or without making it personal, so to speak. And I don't know if you guys have other thoughts, or of what you do.
Well, I think it's interesting what you're pointing to, Melissa, because we probably can agree that cooperation is the first level of setting down differences. Then collaboration is determining a future outcome that's desirable to all parties and deciding to work for that. And then the final really great thing, which is the synergy, is where we start to see, as you said earlier, Ken, that 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2 or 3 or 5. It might equal 25, So we have these quantum leaps and paradigm shifts, and whatever those words mean to you, until you've actually lived through a transformational experience. We went through one of those last year, where we went through a world that was doing what it was doing into a world that had all of these artificial boundaries put on it. And now we're into another transformational experience again, where the world opens back up. Not the same world that we closed down last year. That world's gone forever. Now what's on the table is we have this newfound freedom. We have this new opportunity to be related to each other in a different way. And I think the most I can say to you is that I walk at the mall every single day, and Ken, I think about you about every lap around the mall, and all the people that I pass. I start with a big old authentic smile because I'm really happy to see them. And I want you to know, if I weren't the outgoing, gregarious, guy that I am, I can go down to the high school and I can do my laps down there. There's no other people around, but that's not for me. I want to take this habit of being a people person, that I love everybody, and I want to take that and I want to, stack my my health on top of that. And the new habit that I want is to walk 3 to 5 miles every single day. And while I'm doing that, the cookies along the way are seeing all the beautiful people in all their different sizes and shapes, and they just pop up and show up wherever they are. And then to see them once, twice, 3, 4 times, 5 times as I'm doing the laps, and it starts to be a little bit of a joke. It's fun, and it gets everybody's endorphins going, and then people can't help but giggle. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. This is just that basic fundamental human level. We've exchanged no thoughts and ideas. There's been no conversation about dogma. There's been no conversations about politics, but we already have something to build on. We have our sameness, no matter what their color or age or size or whatever. It's just, we exchanged a smile first, and then secondly, a hello, beautiful day, isn't it? Looking good, et cetera, or how many laps is this? It's really at a level where it's quite different than sitting in the recliner 7 days a week, doing something on the computer. Make sense?
Yeah, absolutely agree.
So now what if we take that out and we start bringing this openness and this practice? And I loved what you said, Melissa, about it's so difficult for people to set their ego down and their need to be right. I don't know that we ever can do that. About the best we can do is notice when that need to be right is getting in the way of the conversation. And that's where a choice and a decision can be made. And I really do think there's a how it is before the decision and how it is after the decision. And I'll give you an example. So I'm not going to say anything for about 10 or 15 seconds, okay? This is a planned pause. And all of you folks that are listening at home, I want you to have no thoughts whatsoever for 15 seconds, and I'll time it. Don't worry about it. I'll let you know when the 15 seconds is up. And that's time. So who was successful at having no thoughts whatsoever for 15 seconds?
Kind of hang out there quite a bit. So,
so I laugh because I do a bit of meditation, but it's almost like even when you're doing meditation, you're concentrating on the breath, for instance, or sometimes I just concentrate on an object, and that way I'm only thinking about that one object, but I'm still thinking of that one object or my breath. So it takes a long time to kind of empty that all out. So
one of the trainings is to visualize a white spot, okay? And here's what really happens for people. Unless you're very advanced and trained in this for a very long period of time, you're also trained to not hear yourself when you're having thoughts. You know, so there are times when a thought comes into your mind and it's dismissed because you're concentrating on something else, but that thought still occurred. So now what it comes down to is being able to concentrate on the breath or the white spot or that sort of thing, and be able to hear when your internal clock says, you're losing this argument. You know, this ain't going well for you at all, you know? And then you have to come back and then reposture and new stance and more arguments and better evidence, et cetera, et cetera. I've always found that, like, for instance, if you're in a conversation with somebody and your thoughts are going into, I have to pick up the cat's medication this afternoon. I'm really looking forward, you know, to getting to Aldi so that I can take advantage of the avocado sale that they're having. And then the neat part of it is you can just make a decision. Oh, okay, that'll wait. Let me get back and listen to what's going on here. You know, you can make a decision each time to interrupt whatever behavior is going on for you. And when you do this on purpose and you're a person who's out for the world to be a different place, it's in every conversation, not just the so-called important ones. Anytime you're thrown to have an argument with somebody or disagree with somebody, rather than giving your evidence inside, if you can train yourself to say, well, what does that mean for you? Can you explain that to me more fully? And when you feel that way, what's going on for you? I'd like to understand that.
Agree. You know, it's interesting because, you know, in having conversations with people and many times, like, I remember doing this with my old roommate, and he had some interesting beliefs. I'll just leave it at that. But in any case, I would always just sit there and listen, and I would dig in and ask him a lot of questions. And after understanding him and where he came from and what he's been through, it made more sense to me why some of his beliefs were what they were. And I was fine with that. But what was at sometimes points, I guess for me was disappointing, was that he wasn't as interested in hearing about me or why or how comes or anything. And so I would just leave it at that. And I'll tell you, the one thing I gained from that is he absolutely adores me to this day. He lives in another state, but we still really like each other. I think because of that, instead of creating conflict, that's just not my thing. But I it's nice to meet people who are also, equally interested in understanding of things about other people as well.
We have a thrownness to that, Melissa. I believe that it's transactional in nature, and we're keeping score. I gave you one. When you giving me back mine?
Yeah. I know it's probably not right, but it's the truth.
Well, whether it's right or it isn't right, it gets stretched, because even the most advanced trained person at some point is going to run out of gas of listening to the other person just constantly, expounding on whatever. So the interesting part of it is to make a decision, while you're in the moment, of whether or not you're actually interested in the conversation, or if you can authentically say to the person is, I've stopped listening to you. There's nothing in this for me right now, and I'd be more than happy, to hear everything that you have to say, but I'm going to get the same benefit out of it if I, put my ear pods in and listen to Bohemian Rhapsody while you're speaking. You know what I'm saying? So people do that in life. They show up for meetings that they're supposed to be there to make a difference, and they're tuned into something completely different. They did not show up to put themselves on the court and to be a player that actually creates something. Ken?
It's just, this feels like a spilling over conversation, that whole thing I've been playing with a little bit. Yeah. If you have an emptiness in you of not feeling heard, you're not going to have you haven't filled yourself up with feeling that you've been heard to the point where you can now listen, and it's interesting, it's something that's really kind of struck me through the whole pandemic thing, is if you feel that there's something lacking, then you've got to do something about filling that space within you first before that abundance spills over. And the other thing that I found really interesting was, what are you filling yourself with? Anger, resentment, that's what's going to spill over. Love, compassion. It's been amazing watching some people who, invested all of his time and energy in creating, safe environments for the elderly, or bringing people food who couldn't leave their homes, or transforming their entire business to, help the community in some way. And there are others that just blew things up, and just sabotage relationships.
Or they just drank through the pandemic. That's what they filled themselves up with, a lot of wine.
Yeah. No, it's true, so, and it's interesting. Like, I know a lot of people who, that's a great example. They lost access to the gym. They started, so they weren't exercising, they weren't eating as well as they could. And now they're like, oh man, I got weight to lose, I'm out of shape. And then others took a different approach. Like for me, I learned to work out at home, and do a lot of body weight training. I learned how to cook so I could eat healthy, and actually came out of the whole thing in better physical and mental condition than I was before I went into it. And it was just nothing special. It was just a choice, And I wonder how often is it a conscious choice? So someone who's that needing to speak to you, to get you to hear them, are they even conscious of the need to be heard? They may not be. So you're on the other side listening, and it just seems like they're talking, and they're just starved. So when you're actually feeding them, which feels so good to them, and they may not realize that. I definitely get that, Melissa, because I've had conversations where I remember speaking to someone for 3 hours and they didn't even know my name at the end of it. But they felt really good afterwards, and I felt good that they felt good. And for me, I feel full in that way. Like I forget to introduce myself a lot, because it doesn't matter. I don't care if I'm known. I feel known and heard, by all the connections in my life. So it's not important, so it's kind of cool when you get to give that to someone else,
Yeah.
But you got to fill yourself up first,
Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah, one of the interesting dynamics while you were speaking, Melissa and I have a common friend who came to my office about 5 years ago, and it was a 50-minute run-on sentence. You know, and finally he took a breath and he said, "Well, what about you?" I said, "Well, enough about me." I said, "That was really interesting." I said, "I got another meeting coming up here, and let's do this again real soon, but not too soon, okay?" So the whole idea of sometimes just saying what's so to somebody and without having to recreate what they said and all that, you just needed to talk, didn't you?
Yeah.
That you actually get, something beyond the words, and you can give that back to people. But the cool thing is that we're going to go back out and be around people in social settings, business settings, what have you. There's going to be this great opportunity to be misunderstood in a group where certain people have a certain relatedness and a special language between them that's not necessarily shared by all 20 or 30 people that are in the room. Mm-hmm. And without realizing it, it's possible to have some pretty awkward blunders, either in inclusion or, leaving people out, or just plain using language that's not, that they're not used to hearing or listening or understanding. So we were talking about the awkwardness of how easy it was before the pandemic to go to group gatherings and hug, right? And so on the other podcast that Vanessa and I did the other day, she volunteered. I go out to these groups of people, and it's like, I'm with family members. I haven't seen them for a while, and I've hugged them goodbye once already, but now we're still talking. Do I have to hug them again? The other thing, at church, if I hug some people but not others, are they going to be offended? And so, from Vanessa's mouth to my ears, it comes down to, it's not just hugs. Sometimes it's a sentence. Sometimes it's wording. Sometimes it's, having a brief conversation where nobody else knows what that is referring to, that they don't have the anchor and experience to know what that means. So different than a Zoom call where we all wait our turn to go next. And some of us are knitting, and some of us are reading Stephen Covey, and others of us are actually watching and seeing what's going on. Melissa, any of that ring true for you?
Oh my goodness, that happens all the time. It's really, I'll share a story that was really, this was not okay, but this one person was just on the phone, and maybe it was an important call, but unfortunately we're trying to talk to this person and they weren't responding. And if she had made a note in the chat, hey, I have to take this phone call, and maybe took her video off, it would have been fine because we would have known that. But because she was still on it and it was obvious she wasn't engaged, and I'm all like, and then so it was unfortunate, but I had to text her separately afterwards, and I said, please don't do that. Because I'm like, it just looks bad for the whole group, right? To do that. I mean, we all know that sometimes we get distracted, but that was like, a little bit too much,
So Melissa, how much in group face-to-face meetings have you been out there so far after the all clear last week?
With Breakfast Club members or family, because family has definitely been a lot higher. I've seen a lot of family members and had a gathering here. As far as coffee dates, really, probably just like a handful. Since the beginning of the pandemic, obviously I had some events here at the house. You came over one time and we sat outside over the summer last year. But in recent times, only really a handful. And for me, it's just even transitioning to getting used to doing that again, more than I'm fully vaccinated, so I'm not so afraid to be out there. It's just that it's more like just adjusting mentally to just being alone to being around people again, where it was such a transition in the opposite direction when it first started.
Yeah. Yep.
I don't know if other people are experiencing that too, but I am.
Well, I'm certain that some are and some aren't, okay? And that's just how life occurs. So in this half hour, we spent a fair amount of time talking about cooperation, collaboration, a little bit of time, talking about compromise. And those of us that are in the business of making the world a better place, we advise people to not sit down in a make a difference conversation and agree at the beginning to compromise at the end, and everybody walks away unhappy. Stephen Covey basically says it's either win-win or no deal. Let's go get more information, come back and do it again. If it's worth doing, it's worth doing all the way and not checking the box that, well, we compromised. And it's about the same as it was before we started. We're just unhappy about different things than we were at the beginning, right? So we haven't spent a whole lot of time talking about synchronicity and synergizing. So I'm bringing synchronicity up now because that's a really great word that was being bandied about in the 70s. And so on the other side here, when we start our second conversation of today, I'd like to invite you guys to dive into that, having sprung off whatever the vault board is for the 3 C's that we just talked about. Work for you?
Definitely.
Okay, so let's sign off to the folks at home. Thank you very much for listening to us today. Without you, our speaking to each other makes no difference.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, A World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can hear us at exvadio.com/podcasts, Apple Podcasts app, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and wherever you find podcasts.